This story is a fictional work created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, and events are imaginary. It does not portray any real individuals' real events or any official military actions. The wind pressed hard against the thin metal walls of our temporary barracks that night in March 2024, carrying sand and the distant rumble of vehicles moving beyond the outer fence. I had just finished another security rotation near Forward Operating Site Bagram, and I was exhausted down to the bone, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your shoulders like cold iron. My name is Elise Carrington, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, and at 34 years old, I thought I had already learned every possible shape of hurt. I was wrong. When I stepped inside the barracks, my squad was gathered near the mail table, grinning the way soldiers do when they sense a moment of normal life breaking through deployment burnout. Someone nudged a small brown package toward me and joked that it must be a late birthday gift from home. For a second, I let myself believe that maybe my sister had done something kind for once. Maybe Natalie had remembered that even grown soldiers still feel birthdays in quiet ways. I peeled back the tape, listening to the wind whistle around the doorframe, the laughter dying behind me as I opened the box. Inside lay a DNA testing kit, bright white beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and resting on top was a folded note written in the handwriting I knew too well. "Maybe this will prove Dad was right. You were his military mistake." The words struck me harder than any blast or recoil. My breath caught. The room fell silent. One soldier muttered something, then shut his mouth because everyone understood the weight of what had just happened. "You do not attack someone who is deployed. You do not drag family cruelty into a combat zone." I stood frozen. The smell of dust and diesel mixed with the memory of my father's funeral, the crisp flag folded against my chest, the chill in Natalie's stare, as if she had been waiting for the day I would be cut out of the picture for good. She had always mocked me, calling me the forgotten one, the outsider, the daughter who did not belong to our military bloodline. But sending this here, sending it now, felt calculated in a way that reached beneath my armor. I closed the box and felt something inside me shift with slow finality. Fine. I would take the test, but not for her, not for her satisfaction or cruelty. I would take it to end the question that had shadowed 34 years of my life. Have you ever felt diminished by your own family even after giving everything you had? Share your thoughts below. Hours later, as I tried to sleep, my phone buzzed with a message from the JAG office. "Staff Sergeant Carrington, please report. We received a civilian legal notice regarding your father's estate." A cold wave rolled through me. She did something. Natalie planned something far bigger than a cruel package. From the outside, our home in Colorado Springs looked like the kind of place where discipline and love lived side by side, a tidy 2-story house near Fort Carson with a flag always raised perfectly on the pole, and a yard clipped so neatly the neighbors joked my father must line up the grass with a ruler. But inside those walls, the air was thick with judgment and the kind of silence that settles into your bones long before you can name it. My father, Colonel Robert Carrington, carried the weight of the uniform in a way that made people stand straighter when he passed. He was respected, firm, and consistent, the kind of officer soldiers remembered decades later. My mother, Linda, however, ran the house with a colder brand of authority, one built on control tension and a constant undercurrent of comparison. And then there was Natalie, my older sister, by 4 years, the golden child groomed from birth to inherit every spotlight the family could aim her way. I grew up knowing before I knew anything else that something about me irritated them, that I was always a step out of rhythm in a household obsessed with perfect cadence. My earliest memory is of sitting on the floor near the hallway, listening to the echo of my mother's voice, as she told someone on the phone that I did not have the look or temperament of a Carrington child. I did not understand it then, but I felt it like a draft slipping under a doorframe, cold, unwelcome, and sharp enough to follow me for years. Natalie seemed to sense that weakness like a wolf testing the edge of a fence. Even when we were children, she moved through the house with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her hair always styled her outfits, always selected with care, and her words always dipped in something that made me feel smaller. When Dad lifted her onto his shoulders at family picnics, she would flash me a triumphant grin as if she had won a contest I never knew we were playing. When she brought home an A, She announced it with fanfare. When I brought home the same grade, my mother only nodded and asked if I could help unload the dishwasher. It was not the absence of praise that hurt most, but the quiet, the constant message that my existence was background noise to the main performance happening in the rooms around me. I was the child who did not quite match the family photograph, the one who, according to my mother's expression, always seemed like a reminder of something she did not want to remember. She was not openly cruel, but her brand of rejection came in subtle, precise cuts. A sigh when I entered the room, a lingering look at my face as if trying to solve a puzzle she disliked, a soft comment to a neighbor about Natalie having her father's eyes while I apparently had no resemblance to either parent. Even as a child, I caught pieces of conversations whispered behind doors, conversations that stopped the second I appeared. Natalie picked up every cue. She seemed to know instinctively that she was the rightful heir to our parents' attention, while I was the obligation they preferred not to address. By the time I reached middle school, she had already perfected the art of manipulation, feigning sweetness in front of adults, then leaning close to hiss little reminders that I did not belong. "You are so weird, Elise," she would whisper. "You do not act like us. You do not look like us." Sometimes she added a smile that mirrored my mother's. Those were the moments that lodged in my chest, the ones I still remember more clearly than birthdays or holidays. And yet through it all, my father remained the one steady point in the storm. He did not intervene as much as I wished, but he watched me with a softness I never saw from anyone else. He applauded quietly when I brought home awards he asked about my homework. He showed up to every school ceremony, even the boring ones. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of pride and worry, as if he was holding a truth he could not let slip. I did not understand it then. In high school, desperate for something that felt like structure or belonging, I joined Army Junior ROTC. It was supposed to be a small after-school activity, but it became more than that. For the first time, adults looked at me without comparison. I performed well, not because I was trying to impress anyone at home, but because the discipline made sense in a world that otherwise refused to. When my instructor told me I had natural leadership potential, I almost cried because no one had ever linked my name to the word potential before. Dad was proud. Mom was not. She said it was predictable, and Natalie smirked, asking if I planned to hide in the Army my whole life the way people hide from things they cannot face. But for me, ROTC felt like oxygen. It gave me a path, a doorway out of a house where everything about me was treated as a flaw, and so the decision to enlist at 18 came easily. I told my parents at dinner. Dad nodded silently, absorbing the weight of it, but my mother froze her hand on her glass before she whispered that I was making a mistake. Natalie leaned back, her brows arched in triumph, as if she had known all along that the outsider would choose an outsider's life. I excused myself from the table before they could see how much their reaction stung. If you grew up being the child who had to become an adult too early, you understand exactly how this moment felt. When I raised my right hand at 18 and swore the oath of enlistment, I felt something settle inside me with the weight and clarity of a long-delayed truth. Leaving Colorado Springs and everything that house represented felt less like running away and more like choosing a life that did not require me to apologize for my existence. My first duty station was Fort Hood, which later became Fort Cavazos, a place sprawling wide under the Texas heat where the cadence of marching troops and the rumble of convoys became the background music of my young adulthood. I remember stepping off the bus wearing boots still too stiff and brand new, and feeling for the first time as if the ground beneath my feet was willing to claim me. The Army did not care that I was the quieter sister, or the child my mother never quite accepted. It cared whether I showed up on time, whether I learned my tasks, whether I pushed myself harder than the day before. That was a language I understood instinctively. During my first year, I learned to polish boots until they reflected the fluorescent lights of the barracks hallway. I learned to disassemble and reassemble my weapon until the motions felt built into my bones. I learned to take orders without flinching and to find the thin line between exhaustion and growth. My drill sergeant once told me that discipline reveals character. For me, it revealed something deeper. It revealed relief. When I called home, my mother said that I was predictable, that someone like me would naturally gravitate toward an institution that tolerated mistakes. Natalie laughed in the background and said that I had only proven her point, that I was running from reality. Dad, however, sent me a short email one night after lights out. "Proud of you, Elise. Someday you will understand why people hide things." I read that line over and over until sleep finally pulled me under, and I never forgot the way the last part felt like a breadcrumb dropped on a path I did not yet know I was walking. Over the next few years, I found something in my unit that I never had at home. Not just structure, but belonging. When you train, sweat, fail, and rise again beside the same people day after day, you become part of something that cannot be bought or faked. They became my real family, the kind that saw me without the layer of comparison that clung to me back in Colorado. By the time I deployed to Iraq in 2011, I had earned the respect of peers and leaders the hard way through consistency rather than charisma. I remember the sandstorms that swallowed entire days, the distant thump of explosions, the long quiet nights when we played cards just to feel human. I remember writing letters home and receiving short responses from Dad, who always asked if I was eating enough while Mom sent clipped messages reminding me not to embarrass the family name. Natalie did not write at all. When I returned stateside, she made a point of telling me that even the Army must accept anyone willing to sign the paperwork. Yet when Dad hugged me longer than usual, his eyes shining, I caught the shadow of something like sadness there, as if he knew a secret he wished he could protect me from. My next deployment came in 2015 to Kuwait. It was less intense than Iraq, but it taught me different lessons, the kind about patience, readiness, and the long, slow wait of waiting between briefings. When I visited home that Christmas, Natalie showed up to dinner dressed as if attending a gala and spent half the night emphasizing her recent promotion at her corporate job. She barely asked about my deployment, instead turning every conversation back to herself. But when Dad pulled me aside later that evening, he whispered that he was proud of the soldier I had become and that no distance could change what I meant to him. The way he said it left a strange ache in my chest, one I did not have the words for at the time. In 2019, I deployed to Afghanistan. By then, I had risen through the ranks, earned leadership roles, and learned to read the unspoken weight in young soldiers' eyes during long nights at the outpost. I knew how to keep people calm during chaos, how to move decisively when seconds mattered, and how to carry grief quietly when letters arrived too late. My mother said during a phone call that perhaps I enjoyed the attention that came with wearing a uniform, and Natalie said that some people joined the military because they did not have enough going on in their real lives. Still, Dad wrote me often, more often than before, and though his messages were brief, they carried warmth that felt like a lifeline. When I came home from that deployment, I visited him at his office, and he gave me a small box with a challenge coin from his early officer years. As he placed it in my hand, he said, "Someday, Elise, you will understand why people hide things and why love sometimes chooses silence." I did not understand then. But the sentence followed me through every duty station and every year of service, becoming heavier with every unanswered question, whispering that my place in the family had always been built on something fragile, something unspoken, something waiting to crack open at the worst possible moment. My father died on a cold morning in February 2023 at the VA hospital in Denver, and even though I had known for months that his heart condition was worsening, the call still hit me like a blow I could not brace for. I had been home on leave that week and was already driving toward the hospital when the nurse informed me he had slipped away quietly before sunrise. The world outside my windshield blurred into one long ribbon of winter gray, and I remember thinking how cruel it felt that the strongest man I had ever known could vanish into silence so quickly. The funeral took place 4 days later at Fort Logan National Cemetery under the wide Colorado sky, where flags snapped in the wind and rows of white stones stretched like a sea of disciplined memory. The honor guard moved with solemn precision, folding the flag with practiced hands as the bugle notes from taps drifted across the cemetery. I stood rigid at attention until my vision wavered and my throat burned. He had worn the uniform for decades, carrying burdens I never fully understood, and seeing him honored that way should have brought peace. Instead, it brought a sharp ache I could not name. Natalie arrived in a fitted black dress with makeup flawless, as if the funeral were another stage she needed to perform on. She clung to my mother, whispering in her ear every few seconds, while both of them avoided looking at me. I told myself they were grieving in their own way, but even grief should not feel so pointed, so deliberate. When the service ended and people drifted toward their cars, I stepped behind a cluster of fir trees to catch my breath. The cold air stung my eyes. That was when I heard them. Natalie and Mom standing just around the corner, their voices lowered, but not enough. "Once the estate settles, she'll be out for good, Mom. Then we can breathe again." My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I froze. Estate. Out for good. They were talking about me. Natalie saw me a second later, and her face blanched as if I had caught her committing a crime she had never expected me to witness. For a fraction of a moment, something panicked flickered across her features, but she smoothed it away with a brittle smile. "Elise," she said, drawing out my name as if trying to rewrite the moment into something harmless. "We did not see you there, but the damage was done." Mom lowered her gaze, pretending to straighten her coat collar, though her hands trembled. Neither of them offered an explanation. Neither of them asked how I was holding up after losing the only person in that family who had ever treated me with steady affection. I walked past them without speaking, too afraid that if I opened my mouth, every fracture in my chest would spill out in front of strangers. When I approached the cemetery parking lot, a few of my father's old colleagues saluted me. One of them, a retired sergeant major, placed a hand on my shoulder and said he was proud of the soldier I had become. I thanked him, but inside, his words twisted painfully because pride felt wrong when my family felt like a trap waiting to spring shut the second I let my guard down. After the funeral, we gathered at a quiet reception hall near downtown Denver. People shared stories about my father, tales of training missions and leadership moments that painted him as the kind of man who lifted others without needing applause. I tried to listen, but my mind kept replaying the phrase, "once the estate settles." It curled around my thoughts like barbed wire. When the attorney handling my father's estate, Mr. Dalton, announced that the reading of the will would be postponed due to pending paperwork, Natalie let out a soft exhale that sounded too much like relief. Mom placed a hand on Natalie's arm, and the gesture carried meaning I was not meant to see. They were hiding something. I felt it in my bones. Over the next week, every attempt I made to ask about the will was met with vague reassurances. Mom said things were complicated. Natalie said legal matters take time, but their tones were wrong. They were too careful, too synchronized, like two people reading lines from the same script. One evening, while packing my bag to return to base, I found myself holding the challenge coin Dad had given me years earlier. I pressed it between my palms and whispered the line he had repeated so often: "Someday, you will understand why people hide things." For the first time, those words chilled me. What secrets had he wanted to reveal? Why had he left that breadcrumb for me? What truth had he died carrying? When I hugged my mother goodbye at the door, she stiffened as if the contact burdened her. Natalie barely looked up from her phone. My father's absence felt enormous, but so did the space between me and the people who were supposed to be my family. As I drove away from Colorado, the mountains shrinking in my rearview mirror, a knot in my chest tightened with the certainty that something dark was unfolding behind the scenes. And whatever it was, I was no longer just the daughter who did not belong. I was the obstacle they needed removed. I received my deployment orders in early March 2024, while the mountains around Fort Carson were still holding on to the last thin layers of winter snow, and the air carried that restless edge that always comes before a major transition. I had been expecting the orders for weeks, but the moment they arrived in my inbox, the world seemed to exhale and tighten all at once, as if reminding me that the Army moved forward whether my family life was falling apart or not. I spent my final days on base packing gear, completing briefings, and preparing my soldiers for the rotation ahead. My thoughts drifted off into Dad and the way he used to stand quietly at the end of the driveway whenever I left for previous deployments, offering nothing more than a nod that somehow meant more than 1,000 words. This time the driveway was empty. Natalie had not spoken to me since the funeral, and Mom had sent only a short message saying to take care without adding the usual predictable comment about how the family name mattered. I drove to their house the evening before I left, even though I knew neither of them would meet me outside. Sure enough, the windows stayed dark and the porch light flickered the way it always did when Natalie forgot to change the bulb. I stood there for a few minutes, letting the cold settle into my gloves, then turned away, feeling strangely relieved. There was nothing left to explain and nothing left to repair. Early the next morning, the Army transport buses lined up outside the installation, and soldiers loaded their rucks with a mixture of resignation habit and quiet anticipation. Deployments always carried a weight that could not be measured by the bags we carried. It was the weight of unfinished conversations and uncertain endings. As I climbed the steps of the bus, I reminded myself that the unit needed my focus, not my grief. I took my usual seat near the back where I could count helmets and check faces, making mental notes of who seemed anxious and who masked it well. The engines rumbled to life, vibrating through the floorboards. As the convoy pulled away from Fort Carson, I glanced out the window at the long stretch of road curling toward the highway and told myself the ache in my chest was simply the echo of losing Dad, not the sting of being abandoned by the rest of the family. We landed at our forward site after a long chain of flights and briefings, the kind of journey where hours blur into each other until the world feels reduced to cargo straps and humming engines. Once we settled into the barracks rhythm, my thoughts finally began to quiet. There was comfort in routine, even in a place where danger lived beneath every movement. 1 week into deployment after a 12-hour shift, I returned to my cot, wanting nothing but sleep and silence. Instead, I found my phone lit with a message from Natalie. It read, "Do not forget. Dad knew exactly what you were. No greeting, no explanation. Just that sharp sentence carved with intention." I stared at the words, listening to the wind moan against the tent and the distant clatter of a generator. For a long moment, I could not even react. Natalie had always possessed a talent for cruelty, but sending something like that to a deployed soldier crossed every line of decency. My first instinct was disbelief, followed by a cold surge of anger that rose slowly like water beneath ice. What was I supposed to be? What truth was she trying to weaponize? Dad had loved me. Imperfectly, perhaps, but genuinely. He had always looked at me with a gentleness that contradicted every sharp comment from Mom or every victorious smirk from Natalie. So, what did this message even mean? I turned off the phone and forced myself to lie still, breathing in and out until my pulse steadied. She was being spiteful, I told myself. She was lashing out in the only way she knew how. But a persistent doubt lingered beneath every rational thought. The timing was too strange, the wording too deliberate, and the memory of that conversation at the funeral, once the estate settles, she will be out for good, looped through my mind like static. The next morning, over instant coffee, one of my squad leaders teased me gently about looking exhausted. I almost told him the truth, but stopped myself. Personal drama had no place here. Soldiers depended on me to be steady, grounded, unshakable. Yet later that day, during a quiet moment between tasks, I found myself thinking again about the way Natalie had emphasized exactly as if she were hinting at a truth she believed would break me, a truth she seemed certain belonged to her to reveal. I pushed the thought aside, but it returned whenever the nights grew too still. And the more I replayed her message, the more it felt like the opening move in something larger, something calculated. A week passed, and I tried to bury the tension beneath daily routines, patrol briefings, and the endless maintenance tasks that defined deployment life. But the unease simmered. It grew heavier each time I recalled how quickly Natalie and Mom had avoided looking at me after Dad died. It pressed harder when I remembered Dad telling me someday you will understand why people hide things. I used to think he meant secrets were a burden people carried out of fear. Now, it felt like a warning I had failed to decode in time. Looking back, that single text was not just a moment of cruelty. It was the first clear sign that Natalie had set something in motion long before I realized a storm was coming. And by the time I understood the true nature of what she had done, it would already be too late to walk away unchanged. The package arrived on a dry wind that carried dust across the barracks courtyard as if the whole base had paused to watch something it already sensed would not end well. Mail days during deployment were usually small celebrations where soldiers traded snacks, letters, and small reminders of home. But when the supply specialist called out my name and held up a plain brown box, the energy around our table shifted with a quiet curiosity. I had not told anyone I expected a package because I was not expecting one. Certainly not from Colorado, and definitely not from my family. My squad mates gathered around with the kind of hopeful amusement that broke up long stretches of tension. Someone joked that maybe my mom had finally sent the cookies she promised 2 years ago. Another suggested my sister had discovered guilt and decided to send something decent for a change. I forced a smile, even though every mention of Natalie scraped against nerves I had been trying to ignore since her last message. I sat on the edge of my cot and pulled the package into my lap, feeling the familiar thrum of generators humming through the floor and faint voices echoing against the thin metal walls. My fingers dug into the tape and peeled it back slowly. The room quieted the way it does when instinct whispers that something is about to happen. Inside lay a bright white DNA testing kit tucked neatly beneath a short handwritten note. The handwriting jolted me before the words even registered. When I unfolded the note, the sentence sliced through the air with surgical cruelty. Maybe this will help prove what Dad always knew: you were not a real Carrington. Not even his mistake, just the Army's. It took a second for the meaning to settle, but when it did, the silence around me thickened so sharply I felt it press against my chest. No one moved. No one exhaled. The barracks usually buzzed with background noise. Laughter cards, shuffling boots dropping against metal, but now it felt like I had stepped into a vacuum. A humiliation delivered privately is sharp enough. A humiliation delivered publicly in front of the people who rely on you is something else entirely, something that carves deeper than the sender could possibly understand. My squad leader, Staff Sergeant Cole, stood closest to me, and when he read the words over my shoulder, his jaw tightened visibly. In the Army, disrespect is one thing. Disrespect toward a deployed soldier, especially from a family member, is another entirely. He looked away, giving me space, but his posture radiated anger on my behalf, the kind that said he wished he could confront the sender himself. A specialist muttered that whoever sent it had crossed a line. Another said that was beyond messed up, but most remained silent because silence in a moment like that is not indifference. It is discipline. It is respect. It is the understanding that family wounds can cut deeper than any battlefield injury. My throat felt dry as desert air. I stared at the kit, the brand name catching glints of light from the overhead bulbs. The shape of it felt like an accusation, an invitation, and a threat all at once. Memories flickered in the back of my mind. Natalie at the funeral whispering about the estate, my mother's shuttered expression, the unanswered questions about where I truly belonged in that house. Suddenly, everything felt like one long thread leading to this box. Cole cleared his throat softly and asked if I wanted him to toss the whole thing into the burn barrel. For a heartbeat, I almost said yes. I wanted to reject it, to pretend the question had never been asked, to protect myself from the fracture this test might carve into the last memories I held of Dad. But something heavier anchored me in place. Dad had carried secrets, and he had warned me, someday you will understand why people hide things. Maybe this was the path to understanding, or maybe this was exactly what Natalie wanted. Either way, I felt the ground shift beneath me the way it does right before a decision that cannot be undone. No, I said. I will take the test. The words surprised even me. Not for her. For me. I said it aloud because I needed to hear the conviction in my own voice. Cole gave a slow nod approval, mixed with concern. He understood this was more than sibling cruelty. It was a strategic blow aimed at a moment when I was thousands of miles from home, unable to defend myself. Soldiers drifted away respectfully, but their glances lingered with unspoken support. I found myself alone again with the box and the emptiness pressing against my ribs. That night after the shift, I sat at the small metal desk near my bunk and opened the kit with steady hands, even though my heartbeat thudded hard enough to echo in my ears. Every step felt surreal, swabbing, sealing, documenting. I thought of Dad, the challenge coin he gave me, the softness in his voice when he said he was proud. Was any of it real, or was I clinging to illusions he built to protect me? When I sealed the return envelope, I felt an odd mixture of fear and clarity. Whatever the results said, they would not change who had raised me, who had believed in me, who had whispered truths he was too afraid to explain. But they might expose why Natalie had always acted like she held a weapon I could not see. I walked the envelope to the outgoing mail drop, and when it left my hand, a strange calm settled into my breath like the quiet before a storm. Do you think I should forgive her Or finally confront everything she has tried to hide? Comment below, because this is the moment I realized the fight was only beginning. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the base felt unusually still, as if the air itself had paused to listen. I had just finished reviewing patrol assignments when my phone vibrated with the alert. For a moment, I ignored it, thinking it was another logistics update or a weather warning, but then I saw the subject line and everything inside me went weightless. Your DNA analysis is ready. My fingertips went cold. I stepped outside into the harsh sunlight that spread across the gravel yard and found a quiet corner near the HESCO barriers where soldiers sometimes went to breathe between shifts. The sky above was painfully clear. I tapped the screen. The words blurred for a second, then snapped into focus like a blow to the sternum. No biological relationship detected with Robert James Carrington. My mouth went dry. I read the line again, my pulse hammering so loudly I could barely hear the distant hum of generators or the chatter from the motor pool. No biological relationship. 4 words that rearranged 34 years of my life. I sank onto a crate, unable to trust my own balance. The sun pressed against the back of my neck, and yet my whole body felt cold. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to polish my first pair of boots, how to give a correct salute. The man who stood in the front row at every ceremony and remained steady through every deployment was not my father by blood. A sharp ringing filled my ears, and for a long moment I could not breathe. Every memory of Dad flickered through my mind like snapshots shuffled too quickly. His proud nod the day I received my sergeant's stripes. The way he placed his hand on my shoulder with quiet reassurance whenever Mom or Natalie sharpened their words. His warm smile when I returned from Iraq in 2011 wearing a uniform that had begun to feel like a second skin. His voice when he said he was proud of the soldier I had become. Were those moments real, or were they constructed to hide a truth he feared would destroy me? My vision blurred as I scrolled further. A suggested paternal match appeared linked to a last name I had never seen before. Hartman. A name that meant nothing yet carried the weight of everything I had not known. My hands trembled as I closed the report. I tried calling Mom even though I knew her gift for selective silence. The call rang twice, then stopped. Not declined, not answered, just avoided. I called again 30 seconds later, and this time it went straight to voicemail. By the third attempt, voicemail picked up instantly as if she had toggled something to keep me out. I stared at the screen, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes. Mom had always held herself together with a rigid kind of control, but this was something else. Something that smelled of fear, not grief. Then my phone buzzed with a new notification, a message from Natalie. Told you. 2 words dripping with triumph, sharp and exact, like the edge of a blade she had been dying to twist. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. Told you. She had been waiting for this moment. She had planned it. She had orchestrated it so the truth would hit me thousands of miles away, surrounded by sand and uncertainty, unable to confront anyone. And for what? What did she gain from breaking me now? The desert wind kicked up a swirl of dust around my boots, and I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. I had faced rocket alarms and 12-hour patrols and nights where the silence sounded too much like danger, but none of it compared to the hollow ache spreading through my chest. I forced myself to stand, gripping the edge of the barrier until my balance returned. My throat felt raw, but my mind slowly sharpened beneath the shock. The timing was too perfect, the cruelty too calculated. Why send the package during deployment? Why wait until I was isolated, exhausted, stretched thin? Unless she wanted to make sure I could not respond, could not fight back, could not protect myself. And then the thought struck me with a clarity that chilled my spine. She wanted me weakened because something else was happening back home, something bigger than the truth about my birth. The estate, the postponed will reading, the whispers at the funeral. The phrase, once the estate settles, she will be out for good. A cold pulse moved through me. The DNA test was never the point. It was a weapon, a lever, a distraction. Natalie wanted this truth exposed now because it served whatever she was constructing behind my back. My phone buzzed again, but this time I let it ring. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. I walked back toward the barracks in a fog, feeling every grain of sand shift beneath my boots. Inside the hallway, soldiers glanced at me with quiet concern. They did not know what had happened, but they felt the energy change. Military families are complicated, but soldiers understand betrayal instinctively. It shows in the eyes before the words come. I went to my bunk, sat on the edge, and held my challenge coin from Dad between both hands. The metal felt warm from the heat of my palms. I whispered the question that had been sitting heavy in my chest since the funeral. Why did you hide this from me? The coin did not answer, but the memory of his voice surfaced anyway. Someday you will understand why people hide things. I had not understood then. I barely understood now. But for the first time, clarity surfaced through the grief. Natalie was not exposing the truth. She was using it, and whatever she had set in motion was only beginning to unfold. 2 days after the DNA results shattered the ground beneath me, I was sitting inside the dim JAG office trailer reviewing incident reports when my name was called through the doorway in a tone that told me whatever waited outside was not routine. The Judge Advocate General representatives rarely summoned soldiers without notice, and never during deployment unless a legal matter required immediate attention. When I stepped into the hallway, Captain Reeves stood stiffly with a sealed folder tucked under his arm, his expression unusually guarded. "Staff Sergeant Carrington," he said, "please step into my office." I followed him into a cramped room where a single laptop hummed beside a stack of regulations manuals. He closed the door gently, then placed the folder on the table between us. "Before I open this," he said, "I need you to understand that anything involving civilian estate claims while you are deployed is handled very carefully. Your family submitted a legal petition yesterday afternoon." My stomach tightened. I had not spoken to my mother since the day I tried calling her about the DNA results, and Natalie's cruel message had been the only communication since. Captain Reeves slid the folder toward me. "The petition states that based on newly discovered information regarding paternity, your family is requesting you be formally removed from the Carrington estate." His words struck me with a cold force. Removed. As if I were a clerical error they could simply delete. He continued, "They are asserting you have no biological relationship to the deceased, which in their opinion voids any claim to inheritance." I swallowed hard. "Sir, that is not possible. I am his legal daughter. I was born during their marriage. Biological connection does not change legal status." He nodded calmly. "You are correct. This petition has no legal foundation. Colorado law is very clear regarding children born within a marriage. But someone filed it anyway, knowing I was deployed thousands of miles from home, unable to respond, unable to appear, unable to defend myself. I asked who filed it, even though deep down I already knew the answer. "The civilian attorney representing your mother and sister submitted it," he said. "The timing, however, is unusual. It was sent within hours of your DNA results being processed." My breath caught. Hours. They had acted the moment they knew, which meant they were waiting, watching, planning. I felt a tremor move through my chest, not just of hurt, but of understanding. This was not a reaction. This was step 2 in a plan that had begun long before I ever opened that cursed package. Captain Reeves cleared his throat gently. "I have also been asked to notify you that a civilian estate lawyer named Mr. Dalton attempted to contact you, but was informed you were deployed. He left a statement with us indicating he would attempt communication through approved channels." I stared at the folder, the pages inside suddenly too heavy to lift. For years I had suspected that Mom and Natalie saw me as an inconvenience, but this was different. This was strategic. This was premeditated. This was them trying to erase me completely armed with just enough truth to believe they would succeed. Captain Reeves spoke again softer this time. "We will respond formally through JAG. You cannot be removed from the estate on this basis. You are protected under the law. But I need to ask, have you had any recent conflict with your family that might explain their motivation?" I could have laughed if my voice had not been trapped somewhere behind the weight in my chest. Conflict had been the air I breathed since childhood. But motive. Yes. They wanted the estate, and they wanted me out of the way. Sir, I said slowly, I believe they have been planning this for months. I told him about the funeral whispers, the postponed will, reading the sudden silence from Mom, the sharpness of Natalie's comments, the text she sent during deployment. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose a sound that carried more tension than surprise. I see. Then you need to prepare yourself. This will not resolve quietly. He advised me to contact a civilian attorney back home and to keep every piece of communication from my family. As soon as I stepped outside, the sun hit me like a physical blow, but the heat did nothing to thaw the ice spreading through my veins. Soldiers moved around me going about their tasks, but I felt separated from them by a thin wall of disbelief. My own family had filed legal paperwork to erase me from my father's estate, not even a week after I learned the man who raised me was not my biological father. I walked back to the barracks, each step landing heavier than the last. The desert wind kicked up dust in swirling eddies around my boots, and with every gust, I felt the truth settle deeper. Natalie had known. She had known long before I did. The timing, the cruelty, the confidence in her messages, they all made sense now. She had been preparing for this moment, orchestrating it piece by piece. The DNA kit was not her attack. It was her confirmation. The legal petition was the real strike. And the worst part was realizing she expected me to fall apart under the weight of it, to crumble quietly, to let her win. But as I reached the door of the barracks, a calm unlike anything I had felt in days washed through me. If she wanted a war, she had chosen the wrong soldier, and she had underestimated the one thing the Army had taught me better than anything else: how to fight back with discipline, precision, and purpose. I waited until after evening chow to make the call because the satellite connection was clearer when the generators were not straining under the heat of the day. I sat on a concrete step beside the comms tent, the sky above, turning the pale blue of dusk, and typed the number the JAG officer had provided for a civilian attorney in Denver. Her name was Sarah Whitcomb, a specialist in inheritance disputes, someone known for handling cases that blended family tension with complicated legal landscapes. When she answered, her voice was crisp, calm, and steady in a way that immediately grounded me. "This is Attorney Whitcomb," she said. "How can I help you?" For a moment, I could not speak. The truth felt too raw, too tangled to place neatly into a stranger's hands. But then discipline took over, and I walked her through everything: the funeral, the whispers, the DNA kit, the petition filed against me. I half expected her to interrupt or question my interpretation, but instead, she listened with an attentiveness that made me feel for the first time in weeks that someone understood the gravity of what was unfolding. When I finished, she asked, "Can you send me all documentation you have? Emails, texts, any letters from your father, any communication from your mother or sister, and of course, the DNA results." I had already gathered everything into a folder on my encrypted device because part of me sensed how quickly this situation was accelerating. I forwarded screenshots, the official PDF, the message from Natalie, the petition summary JAG had given me, even a picture of the small challenge coin Dad had entrusted to me years earlier. When Sarah called back 10 minutes later, her voice carried a new edge, not anger exactly, but professional alarm. "Elise," she said slowly, "I want to be clear about what I am seeing. Your sister is not exposing the truth. She is weaponizing it." The sentence struck me with such force that I closed my eyes as if bracing for impact. Weaponizing. That was exactly what Natalie had done, loading the truth like ammunition and aiming it at the moment she believed I would be most defenseless. "She knew you were deployed," Sarah continued. "She knew you could not appear in court, and she filed a petition that has no legal basis but carries emotional weight. She is hoping pressure and timing will break you." The words settled heavily, but they also lit something inside me. Something I had not felt since Dad died: resolve. Sarah asked a few more questions about my childhood, my relationship with my father, my mother's attitude, anything that could reveal motive or pattern. I told her about the years of comparison, the subtle rejection, the way Natalie always seemed to stand in a spotlight she built from other people's shadows. I told her about the funeral and the sentence that still rang in my skull: "Once the estate settles, she will be out for good." Sarah exhaled sharply. That is not a passing comment, she said, that is intent. She outlined my legal standing, reinforcing what the JAG representative had said. Because I was born within my parents' marriage, Colorado law defined me as a legal child, regardless of biological connection. My position in the estate was secure unless my father had declared otherwise, which, according to her preliminary search, he had not. And more importantly, she added, your father did something unusual. He updated his estate documents less than a year before his death. That caught my attention instantly. Dad had always been a creature of routine, but estate updates so close to passing were rarely casual. Did he change anything major, I asked. I do not have the full documents yet, but I suspect he added protections. People do that when they fear manipulation or pressure from other family members. The implication curled around my chest, tightening each second. Dad had known. He had known what Natalie was capable of. He had known she would come for the inheritance. He had known she might try to erase me, and yet he had chosen not to tell me why. Sarah continued, I am going to request immediate access to the will. I am also filing a notice that you are represented by counsel. That will freeze any attempt to move forward with the petition until you return home. You will not be blindsided. I nodded, even though she could not see me. Thank you. She paused, and her voice softened. Elise, you sound like someone who has carried this alone for far too long. You do not have to anymore. Tears threatened behind my eyes, sharp and unwelcome. I blinked them back. Soldiers do not cry in the open, especially not during deployment. Instead, I focused on the one truth rising through the chaos like a signal cutting through static. If Natalie had been planning this for months, if she had been waiting for the perfect moment, if she believed she had already won, then the most important choice I could make was refusing to let her dictate the outcome. Sarah asked one final question before we ended the call. Do you want to fight this, Elise? The answer rose instantly, calm and absolute. Yes. Because for the first time since Dad died, I felt something shift, not the ground collapsing, but the ground forming beneath me. A foundation, a direction, a purpose. Natalie believed she could break me by revealing who I was not, but she had no idea who I had become. A soldier, a leader, and now, someone ready to claim justice, not through vengeance, but through truth. And truth was a battlefield she had never learned to navigate. When the JAG office called me back 2 days later, I already sensed the decision before the captain even spoke. His tone was steady but carried the weight of both protocol and concern. Staff Sergeant Carrington, due to the severity of your civilian legal situation, Command, has approved a compassionate release for early return to the United States. The words settled over me like dust after an explosion quietly, but with the certainty that nothing would look the same when it cleared. I packed in silence, moving each item into my duffel with mechanical precision, mindful of the eyes of my squad who understood what a compassionate release meant. It was never granted lightly. Leaving a deployment early pulled at something deep inside me, a knot of loyalty and guilt and duty, but the captain had been clear. The legal petition filed against me required my physical presence, and the Army would never allow a soldier to be cornered without the ability to respond. As I boarded the transport flight, my mind replayed every detail of the petition Natalie had filed. She had timed it to strike while I was gone, believing distance would make me powerless. But now I was coming home, and that was something she had not planned for. The flight landed at Peterson Space Force Base near Colorado Springs just after midnight. The air tasted dry and cold and familiar, but my chest tightened as soon as I stepped outside. Coming home had never felt this heavy. I drove to my mother's house, the one place I never expected to return willingly, but this was where the next phase of truth lived, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. When I knocked, she answered slowly, as if unsure whether she wanted the door open at all. Linda looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders drawn tight, eyes refusing to focus on mine. "Elise," she whispered, her voice trembling as though she had been holding her breath for months. I walked past her into the living room, and the smell of old carpet and stale lavender hit me all at once, stirring memories I had spent a lifetime trying to soften. I asked her directly, "Mom, did you know about the petition?" She pressed her hands together, twisting them like she could wring the guilt out of her skin. Elise, this is all so complicated. I felt something cold settle along my spine. Complicated was the word people used when they knew they had been wrong but did not want to admit it. Before I could press further, my phone buzzed. Natalie. The message glowed harshly in the dim light. Of course, you ran home playing the victim again. Dad always knew you would hide when pressure hit. Heat rose in my chest, but not anger, something sharper purpose. I typed nothing. Natalie thrived on reaction. I refused to feed her. Instead, I looked around the room, taking in the framed photos on the walls, noticing for the first time how many pictures included Natalie and Dad and how few included me. I asked Mom, why did you avoid my calls after Dad died? She flinched like the question had been a slap, though none had been given. Your sister thought it would be better if emotions calmed first, she murmured, but the words sounded rehearsed. I could hear Dad in this house, the echo of his measured voice, the quiet righteousness he carried like a second uniform. And that made me look toward his study door, a small brown frame tucked at the end of the hallway. Something told me to walk toward it. Mom reached out gently, almost pleading. Elise, maybe leave that room closed. My heart thudded once hard because warnings from her were rare, but this one was desperate. I opened the door anyway. The study smelled faintly of old books and aftershave and buried intention. Papers sat stacked on the desk, but one sheet lay apart from the others, slightly angled like someone had moved it recently. I stepped closer, pulse quickening. It was my father's handwriting, the looping steady penmanship I knew as well as my own. The page was a letter, but incomplete. The ink faded near the bottom as if interrupted mid-sentence. My dearest Elise, there are truths a man carries that do not belong to the world but to the heart. If you are reading this, then events have unfolded faster than I expected, and I want you to remember this above all. I paused, my breath trapped. The sentence ended abruptly, trailing into white space. No signature, no final thought. Mom appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, fear shining through. That was private, she whispered. I turned the page over, but it was blank. When did he write this? I asked. Her voice broke. After his diagnosis, but before the last hospital stay. He meant to finish it, but Natalie kept demanding to review his paperwork and he got overwhelmed. That single admission hit harder than any insult Natalie had ever thrown at me. My sister had been circling him even then, pushing him questions about documents, about money, about control. And he had been trying to leave me something not wealth, but truth. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my pocket. Mom watched silently. She looked like a woman torn between love and fear, between loyalty and regret. Elise, she whispered, please do not escalate things. Your sister is struggling. My breath steadied into something firm. She is not struggling, Mom. She is scheming, and I am done letting her write the story of my life. As I stepped out of the house, the sky above Colorado Springs was still dark, but dawn was beginning to stain the horizon. For the first time since deployment, I felt clarity. The compassionate release was not an ending. It was the beginning of battle, and I was finally home to fight it. Sarah met me the next morning at her Denver office, a space filled with neatly arranged case files, stacks of estate law manuals, and a single framed quote on the wall that read, "Truth does not fear examination." I sat across from her while she reviewed the incomplete letter I had found in my father's study, the corners slightly worn from years of hiding in plain sight. "There is more he intended to tell you," she said quietly. "We just need to find where he left the rest." She tapped her pen once, then looked up. "I reached out to someone who might help us, someone who knew your father better than most." That was how we ended up driving south toward Colorado Springs, the mountains rising along the horizon like a line of silent witnesses. We pulled into the driveway of a modest brick home not far from Fort Carson, and before we could even knock, the door opened. Lieutenant Colonel Avery Dawson, retired, but still carrying the posture of a man who never fully hung up his discipline, stood there with a solemn expression that told me he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Elise," he said, his voice softer than I remembered from childhood. "You look so much like your father did when he was deciding whether to tell the truth or keep the peace." The words struck something deep in me. We stepped inside, and Avery motioned us toward the living room where a wooden box sat on the coffee table as if placed there deliberately. Before we get to that, he said, I need you to hear some things your father asked me to hold on to until the time was right. He sat across from us, hands clasped together. Your father found out the truth about your biology when you were around 2 years old. The revelation rattled him, but not because of you. He adored you, Elise. What hurt him was the deception surrounding your birth and how quickly the people around him tried to weaponize that truth. I felt my chest tighten as childhood memories reshaped themselves through the lens of that sentence. He continued, Your mother was terrified that if he knew you were not biologically his, he would stop loving you, but he did not for 1 second consider doing anything but raising you as his daughter. I swallowed hard, then asked the question that had been building since deployment began, then, why did Natalie treat me the way she did? Avery exhaled a long, tired breath. Because she was old enough to overhear conversations she should never have heard. She realized early that knowledge could become power, and she used it. She threatened your father more than once, told him she would reveal everything if he did not adjust the will in her favor. Sarah leaned forward, intent. Did he ever make those changes? Avery shook his head no. He refused. He said a will should reflect a lifetime, not a threat, but Natalie did not let it go. She kept pushing, especially after your father got sick. That was when he came to me. He opened the wooden box, and inside lay a neatly organized folder embossed with Robert Carrington's initials. Your father suspected Natalie might try to manipulate finances, so he hired a private investigator, someone discreet who could monitor the accounts while he focused on treatment. My breath stilled. Avery passed the folder to me, and as I opened it, the first sheet was a bank record showing a withdrawal highlighted in red ink. Beneath it, a second record, then a third. Page after page showing thousands disappearing in increments over several months. The total was handwritten across the bottom $60,000. My vision blurred for a moment, not with tears, but with disbelief so sharp it almost felt physical. Natalie stole from him. I managed to say the words quietly, but they shook with something deeper than shock. Avery nodded. She accessed the account while he was undergoing treatment at the VA. He noticed, but he was too weak to confront her directly, so he continued gathering evidence. He planned to revise the will to include protections and to ensure she could not challenge your inheritance. But he ran out of time. Sarah took the papers, studying each one, her brows tightening. This is significant. Extremely significant. With these records, the petition she filed is not just baseless, it could expose her to criminal investigation. I sat back against the couch, the weight of the truth pressing into me from all sides. My father had been fighting for me even while dying. He had taken steps to protect me against a daughter who shared his blood but not his integrity. And Natalie had taken advantage of the one moment he could not defend himself. Avery placed the wooden box in front of me again. There is something else, he said. A USB drive your father kept hidden. He wanted you to have it only when you were ready. I held the small device between my fingers, feeling its cold surface like a key to a door I had spent years walking past without understanding. What is on it? I asked. Avery shook his head. I never looked. He asked me not to. But I think it is what he did not have the strength to finish in that letter. The room fell quiet for several long seconds. I thought of the half-written sentence on Dad's page, the one that ended in silence. Now I understood why. Secrets had chased him until his last breath. Natalie had turned truth into a weapon, but Dad had turned truth into a shield. And now that shield was in my hands. For the first time since returning home, I felt something anchoring inside me. Not grief, not anger, but clarity. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a battle of integrity, and I was ready to carry forward what my father could not finish. The morning of the will reading felt unnaturally still, as if the air over Denver had paused to witness what was about to unfold. Sarah and I arrived early at Attorney Dalton's office, a tall glass building overlooking the city, a place where truths were often revealed in the most clinical and devastating ways. The waiting room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the ventilation system and the steady click of Dalton's paralegal typing behind a frosted glass window. I sat upright, hands clasped tightly in my lap, willing myself to stay steady. Today was the day all of this chaos would be pulled into the open, and whatever Natalie believed she could control would be stripped from her. At exactly 10 o'clock, she swept into the room wearing a fitted blazer too sharp for the occasion and a smirk that told me she had already decided she had won. "Well, well, look who crawled home," she said, her eyes flicking over me as if she were inspecting something on the bottom of her shoe. I said nothing. Silence was stronger than any comeback. Dalton opened the conference room door and motioned for us to enter. The room was formal polished oak table, high-backed chairs, and soft lighting designed to keep emotions contained. Today, it would fail miserably. We each took our seats. Natalie crossed her arms defiantly. Sarah sat poised beside me, calm, focused, ready. Dalton cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to execute the last will and testament of Colonel Robert Carrington." The sound of my father's name spoken aloud made something ache in my chest. Dalton continued reading the standard formalities, then lifted the sealed envelope containing the original document. Natalie leaned forward, already anticipating a declaration of victory. I saw it in her eyes. She truly believed Dad had cut me out. Dalton unfolded the will and began reading. "I, Colonel Robert James Carrington, being of sound mind, do hereby state the following. My entire estate, including property accounts and personal effects, shall be granted in full to my daughter Elise Carrington." The world tilted. Natalie shot to her feet so violently, her chair screeched across the floor. "Absolutely not. She is not his daughter. She is nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." Her voice cracked, breaking through her composure in a way that would have embarrassed her if she were capable of self-reflection. Dalton lifted his hand for silence. "I am not finished." Natalie stood frozen, trembling with fury. Dalton read the next paragraph slowly, deliberately, as if ensuring every syllable had time to detonate. "I have known she is not my biological child since she was 2 years old. I chose her. I raised her. She is my family by every measure that matters." Natalie staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table for balance. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. Dalton continued. "In addition, I have placed provisions to protect Elise from any contest to this will. I am aware that certain individuals may attempt to challenge her inheritance. Let this sentence stand clearly. Any person who contests this will forfeit all rights to any portion of my estate." The blood drained from Natalie's face. She sank into her chair, mouth opening and closing without sound, like someone trying to breathe underwater. Dalton turned a page. "There is more." He pulled out the folder Avery had given me, the one containing the bank statements and records of theft. Mr. Carrington hired a private investigator in the final months of his life. Evidence shows that Natalie Carrington withdrew a total of $60,000 from his account during his medical treatment without consent. The only sound in the room was Natalie's sharp inhale, a wounded animal realizing the trap she set had closed around her instead. Sarah sat taller, her voice crisp when she finally spoke. "Based on these documents, we are pursuing restitution and a fraud investigation." My mother, who had joined moments earlier, gasped, covering her mouth. Natalie shot her a hateful look as if betrayed by the one person she thought would defend her no matter what. "You told me you did not know anything, Elise. You had nothing. You were supposed to lose." She spit the words at me like broken glass. I met her gaze, steady, unshaken. I did not need tricks. I had truth. Dalton placed a final document on the table. "There is one more item. Colonel Carrington wrote a letter instructing us to ensure Elise received the contents of his personal safe. He left no such provision for Natalie." My throat tightened at the thought of Dad planning even this moment, knowing the storm that would follow. Natalie let out a choked sound, half sob, half rage. "This is unfair. She got everything handed to her." "Dad owed me," Dalton responded calmly. "According to these documents, your father disagreed. Completely." The humiliation on Natalie's face was complete, raw, total. The room saw her fully unmasked, no longer the confident sister in charge of the narrative, but a woman exposed for manipulation, greed, and betrayal in front of legal witnesses. Public disgrace in its purest form. As she collapsed into her seat, her voice small cracking, she whispered, "This cannot be happening." But it was. and for the first time in my life, the truth was not a battlefield I had to survive. It was a shield that belonged to me. The hours that followed the will reading felt strangely muted, as if the city outside had lowered its volume out of respect for the chaos that had just unfolded inside that conference room. When Sarah and I stepped into the elevator, the metallic doors closed with a soft thud, sealing off the remnants of Natalie's meltdown. I expected to feel triumphant or vindicated, maybe even relieved, but instead there was only a quiet throb in my chest, the kind that follows a long injury finally exposed to light. By the time we reached the lobby, my phone had already begun vibrating repeatedly. Unknown numbers, text messages, voicemails, notifications piling in faster than I could process. Natalie was calling from her attorney's number and from her own, alternating between rage and desperation as the reality of the will settled into her life like a weight she could not push off. Sarah touched my arm lightly. "You do not owe her anything," she said. "Not today, not ever." Outside the building, a cold gust of Denver wind rushed past us, whipping strands of my hair across my face. It grounded me, reminding me that while Natalie screamed and unraveled, I was still here, still standing, still anchored by truth. We had barely taken 10 steps toward the parking garage when an email from the Colorado Probate Court popped onto my phone. Subject line, "Immediate action required." I opened it. The court acknowledged the will as valid, invoked the no contest clause, and officially removed Natalie from any claim to the estate. Just like that, every scheme she had orchestrated for months shattered. She lost all inheritance rights, and according to the attached notice, she now owed $60,000 in restitution, the exact amount she had withdrawn from our father's account during his treatment. Sarah smiled in that quiet lawyer way that said, "Victory without gloating." "This is swift," she said. "Rare. But the evidence your father prepared made contesting impossible." My pulse steadied. Dad had protected me even after death. Within an hour, another message arrived, this time from the Colorado Department of Human Services Elder Fraud Unit. They were launching an official investigation into Natalie's unauthorized financial withdrawals. She had not just lost the estate, she was now the subject of an elder exploitation inquiry, a charge taken seriously in Colorado, especially when the victim was a veteran. Natalie called again. I let it ring, then again, and again. 5 calls back to back. Sarah looked at me. "You do not have to answer." I knew that, but part of me wanted to hear the tone of her voice now stripped of arrogance. I declined every call. An hour later, a new voicemail appeared. Her voice trembled thick with tears. "Elise, please, we need to talk. This is not what Dad wanted. They are saying I stole from him. You know that is not true. You know I was there for him. You cannot let them do this to me." The words, "you cannot let them do this to me," played like a cracked record. For years, Natalie had expected the world to rearrange itself around her wants, her moods, her entitlement. But I was not bending this time. I deleted the voicemail. That afternoon, while Sarah and I reviewed next legal steps, another knock sounded on her office door. The paralegal peeked in, looking uncomfortable. "Elise, your mother is here." My stomach tightened. I had not seen her since I arrived back from deployment. She stepped into the room, slowly, hands clasped purse hanging from one wrist, the way she held it when she was nervous. She looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe guilt erodes people from the inside. "Elise," she whispered, her voice frayed. "Please listen to me." I raised a hand, gently stopping her. "Why now? Why come to me only after everything fell apart?" Her eyes glistened. "I did not know she took that money. I did not know she would go this far. She was always strong-willed, and I thought she just needed guidance. I thought you would both find your way." Tears pooled, but she blinked them back, swallowing hard. "I want to make this right. I want us to fix things." I breathed in, slowly measured. "Mom, you chose her lies over my truth for decades. You stood by while she tore me down. You watched her humiliate me in public and private in moments when I needed you most. You let her rewrite who I was. And now, only now, when the consequences land on her doorstep, you find your voice." Something inside her collapsed. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. "That is not fair, Elise. I tried. I tried more than you know. I held her gaze steady. Trying is not the same as protecting, not the same as standing up, and not the same as choosing what is right. I stepped back. I am not ready to forgive you. Maybe I never will be. Her shoulders crumpled at those words, yet she did not chase me or argue or demand I reconsider. She simply nodded, whispered, "I understand," and left. As the door closed behind her, a strange peace settled over me, the kind people feel when a storm finally moves offshore. The legal fallout grew even harsher in the weeks that followed. Natalie's employer placed her on administrative leave due to the ongoing investigation. Her mortgage lender sent notices because she had drained so much savings expecting the inheritance to replace it. Her husband filed for separation, overwhelmed by the financial and legal mess she had created. For the first time, Natalie had to confront life without a safety net, without a scapegoat, without someone to catch the destruction she caused. Would you forgive in this situation? 3 months passed before I heard her name again. 3 months of silence that should have felt like recovery, but instead carried a strange, delicate tension, as if the air around me had been waiting for something to snap. I had moved temporarily into a small rental on the outskirts of Denver while I sorted out the estate details with Sarah, and I spent my days handling paperwork, meeting with accountants, and slowly untangling myself from decades of emotional knots. Natalie had vanished from every place where she used to dominate. Her social media accounts went silent. Her friends stopped asking about her. Her husband filed for divorce, citing financial deception and emotional instability. She lost her position at the consulting firm after the elder exploitation investigation became public record and creditors began circling. Every new update from Sarah painted the same picture. The spotlight Natalie craved her whole life had finally turned harsh, hot, and unrelenting, revealing everything she tried to hide. I assumed she would avoid me forever. She had too much pride to come crawling back, or at least I believed she did until the morning she appeared at my door. It was early, still dark enough that the porch light cast a sharp white cone over the walkway. I had just returned from a run trying to rebuild a sense of structure in my life when I saw her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, shivering slightly in the wind. Her once polished appearance was gone. Her makeup smeared from crying eyes, swollen hair pulled into a loose knot that spoke more of exhaustion than style. "Elise," she said barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I simply stared at her. This was the same woman who 3 months earlier stood in a conference room screaming that I was nothing. The same woman who sent a DNA kit to a combat zone. The same woman who spent years eroding my place in our family until I felt like a ghost in my own childhood home. Now she looked like she had been hollowed out from the inside. I opened the door only far enough for her to step in out of the cold, then folded my arms, waiting. She hesitated, looking around the small living room, as if expecting remnants of the life she thought I did not deserve. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "They are taking the house. The bank. They said I do not qualify for a modified payment plan because of the investigation. I lost the appeal. My attorney quit. My husband is gone. I have nothing left, Elise." I waited, letting the silence sit between us, forcing her to confront the weight of her own words. She stepped closer, hands trembling. "Dad should not have left everything to you, you know that, right? It was not fair. He should have split it between us." That was the moment I realized she had not come to apologize. Not fully. She had come to rewrite the story again, to shape reality into something where she was still the victim of someone else's choices rather than her own. I spoke carefully, refusing to soften my tone. "Natalie, you are not here because you think Dad was unfair. You are here because your consequences finally caught up to you." She flinched at the word consequences. "Elise, I am begging you. I need help. A loan. A small portion. Anything to get me through until I can find work again. You can afford it. You know you can. You owe me at least that much." My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with the ghost of an old familiar ache, the one she had carved into me for years. I walked to the window, looked out at the street while gathering my words. When I turned back, her eyes were wide, searching for the sister she always assumed would fold. I did not fold. "You think I owe you?" I asked quietly. She nodded, desperate. "After everything we have been through, of course you do. You won, Elise. You got the estate, you got the praise, you got the future. Now help me fix mine." The sentence echoed in my mind. You won, as if this had been a contest, as if my survival of her cruelty was some kind of competitive sport. I stepped closer until she had nowhere left to retreat. My voice was steady cold, but not cruel. "You did not lose to me, Natalie. You lost to your own choices." Her lips parted, a soft sound escaping somewhere between shock and disbelief. "Elise, please. I did not want this. I never meant for it to go this far. You can change this. You can save me." The word save made something inside me harden. She never wanted a sister. She wanted a safety net, a shield, a tool, and she expected me to step into that role again even after everything. I shook my head. "No. You created this path. You walked it. And now you finally reached the end of it." I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped aside. She stared at me, her breath visible in the cold air. Her eyes filled again. "So that's it. You are abandoning me." I met her gaze without wavering. "You abandoned me years ago, long before Dad died, long before the DNA test, long before any of this. This is not punishment. It is responsibility, and it is yours." She stood frozen as if her legs could not decide whether to collapse or run. When it became clear I would not change my mind, she stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter around her thin frame. She hesitated one last time, waiting for me to call after her to offer mercy to break the cycle she had built her whole life around. I stayed silent. She walked down the steps and disappeared into the gray morning light. I closed the door gently, a strange, quiet peace settling into my chest. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over the people who taught me to shrink. And in that moment, I knew I would never go back to who I was before. Moving to Tacoma felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 34 years. The air carried the scent of pine and salt from the sound, and for the first time in months, my shoulders lowered from the constant defensive grip they had been locked in. I rented a small house near Joint Base Lewis McChord, close enough to hear distant training exercises, but far enough to finally separate my identity as a soldier from the chaos of my family. My first morning there, I woke to soft gray light filtering through the blinds and the quiet hum of a neighborhood still half asleep. No shouting, no accusations, no footsteps pacing the hall in anger. Just the steady, hollow rhythm of my own heartbeat and a strange sense of safety that felt almost foreign to me. Transitioning out of deployment had always been tough, but this time it felt different. I was not just returning from Afghanistan. I was returning from a lifetime of emotional battlefields, so I joined a veterans support program recommended by a former commander. The meetings were held in a modest building next to a community center, a place with stained carpets, mismatched chairs, and a coffee pot that was somehow always half full. But it was there, in that imperfect room, that I began to feel the first pieces of myself settling back into place. The group included men and women of all ages, each carrying invisible weight. Some were dealing with grief, others trauma, others the painful shift from service to civilian life. When it was my turn to speak, I expected my voice to shake, but it did not. I told them about the DNA kit, the will reading, the fallout, the silence that followed. One older veteran, a former Marine, leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped. "Family can break you worse than any war," he said. "But choosing peace, choosing yourself, that is the bravest thing you will ever do." His words settled into me like a warm blanket. I kept returning every week, and slowly, the numbness that had wrapped around me since everything with Natalie began to loosen. I started hiking again, exploring the trails near Mount Rainier, feeling the burn in my legs reminding me I was still strong, still capable, still here. I cooked simple meals. I slept through the night. I relearned how to breathe without bracing for impact. After a month, I began unpacking boxes I had ignored at first, too overwhelmed to face them. Most were filled with practical things, uniforms, framed commendations, training manuals. But at the bottom of one was an envelope I did not recognize. My breath caught. The handwriting on the front was familiar, steady, confident, unmistakably his. Dad. My hands trembled as I opened it and pulled out a single page. The paper was worn creased like it had been folded and refolded many times. I sat down slowly, bracing myself as I read. Elise, my daughter. If you are reading this, it means the truth has finally reached you. I knew the day would come when bloodlines would be used against you. People confuse biology with belonging, but family is not built that way. I chose you, and I would choose you again every day of my life. Remember this: blood does not build a family. Loyalty does. I closed my eyes, letting the sentence wash over me. It felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady and grounding, the same gesture he used to give me before every promotion ceremony. For years, I had carried the fear that I did not belong anywhere, not in my family, not fully in the military, not in the world he had hoped for me. But here, in this quiet Tacoma house with his words resting in my hands, I realized he had already answered that fear long before I knew how deeply it ran. I belonged because he chose me, because I chose myself, because peace was something I could finally hold without feeling guilty. A few days later, I framed the letter and placed it on my nightstand, not as a shrine, but as a reminder. A reminder that love can be chosen, a reminder that identity is not something someone else gets to define, and a reminder that surviving betrayal does not end the story, healing does. In the following weeks, I built new routines. Morning runs along the Sound, afternoons volunteering at a veterans outreach center, helping young soldiers navigate the confusing first steps into civilian life. Evening calls with people who cared about me for who I was, not for what I could provide. Sometimes I thought of Natalie, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a soft, distant acknowledgement, like remembering a storm I once survived. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. And choosing myself, choosing peace, choosing a future not defined by the cruelty of others, felt like the clearest path I had ever walked. For the first time, I began imagining a life not shaped by conflict, but by possibility. I was no longer my father's secret, no longer my sister's target, no longer a soldier fighting for a place at a table built to exclude me. I was simply Elise, and that was enough. Do you agree that loyalty matters more than blood? When I look back on everything that happened from the moment my sister called me a military mistake to the day I stood in that Denver conference room hearing my father declare that he chose me, I realize just how wide the distance is between who I used to be and who I have become. For years, I lived in the shadow of a family that made me feel like a temporary guest, someone who existed on the outskirts, never meant to be fully claimed. I carried that weight into adulthood, into the Army, into every deployment, every night spent overseas where the desert wind whispered doubts louder than any enemy could. I believed I had to earn belonging by being useful, by being strong, by being silent. But belonging was never something I needed to fight for. It was something I deserved simply because I existed. I did not know that then. I know it now. The battles I fought in uniform were easier than the ones I fought at home because battlefield rules are clear. Family betrayal is not. It is quiet, slow, invisible. It grows in the places where you expect comfort and safety, and when the truth finally arrives, it hurts in a way that leaves a mark deeper than any wound. But truth also frees. It frees you from stories written by people who want to shrink you. It frees you from identities built on lies. It frees you to finally choose yourself. When that DNA kit arrived in Afghanistan, it felt like a grenade thrown directly at my sense of worth. But today, I see it as the moment the walls finally cracked, the moment the truth slipped out, the moment everything I had swallowed for decades finally surfaced. Natalie wanted to humiliate me. Instead, she exposed herself, her greed, her manipulation, her fear of being compared to a sister she never understood. She lost her inheritance not because I fought for it, but because Dad had already fought for me long before I realized he was protecting me. His letter has become my compass. Blood does not build a family. Loyalty does. That sentence rewrote something inside me, something that had been misaligned since childhood. Because loyalty is a choice, not an accident of birth. Loyalty is earned through actions, patience, honesty, sacrifice, compassion. Loyalty is built through people who show up when the world falls apart, not through those who tear the world apart themselves. and loyalty that you give yourself, the loyalty of honoring your own worth, that is the strongest of all. I want anyone listening to my story to understand something important, especially those who have endured the quiet ache of being overlooked, living in families that mistake cruelty for tradition or control for love. You are not obligated to stay where you are hurt. You are not required to shrink to make someone else comfortable. You do not have to prove your humanity to people who refuse to see it. You can walk away. You can start over. Healing is not abandoning the past. Healing is refusing to let the past decide your future. My life did not magically become easy after the will reading. I still had days when memories stung, when I questioned whether I had done enough or whether I had been too harsh, too distant, too firm. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of who I used to be. A girl standing in a hallway listening to her mother and sister whisper about how she did not belong. A soldier opening a DNA kit in a foreign country with no way to defend herself. A daughter grieving a father while the people who should have loved her schemed behind her back. And then I reminded myself of who I am now. A woman who faced every painful truth and refused to break. A veteran who built a new life in Tacoma with people who stand beside her without conditions. A daughter chosen by a man who understood that love is not limited by biology. A survivor of emotional wars that no medal will ever acknowledge, but that shaped her strength more deeply than any deployment. If you are watching this and you have been hurt by the people meant to protect you, I want you to know this. Your story is not over. Your pain is not the ending. Your worth is not determined by the ones who diminished it. You can rebuild. You can reclaim. You can choose who gets to walk beside you from this moment forward. Not everyone deserves access to your heart, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close a door that has only ever opened to let in harm. My journey from military mistake to rightful heir was not about money. It was about identity. It was about dignity. It was about finally standing in a room where I was never meant to be and realizing my father had built that room for me all along. He gave me a legacy not of wealth, but of choice. The choice to rise above. The choice to believe in myself, the choice to walk away from those who refused to walk with me. And if my story gives even one person the courage to make that same choice, then every painful moment will have been worth it. Thank you for listening, for walking through this journey with me, for letting my voice be heard in places where silence used to live. Have you ever been dismissed or overlooked in your own family? Share your story below.